So we will bring the Joint Assembly JSD Facilities Committee to order. And Ms. Wall, you're probably the easiest one to find the land acknowledgement and read it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on land of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gnos Shish.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Hendricks, would you call roll, please?
Ms. Mayer,
Here.
Ms. Sorensen,
Here.
Ms. Wall,
Present.
Mr. Holst,
I'm here.
Ms. Hale,
Here.
Mr. Muldoon,
All present except for Mrs. Gladys. Then we have a quorum. Thank you. Any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll consider the agenda approved, and we don't have any minutes to approve. So items for action. First of all, let's deal with a summary of our last meeting. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you so much for running the meeting for me today. At our last meeting, I just want to touch briefly on what we covered. We talked about this committee's procedures and decision-making processes, possibility of childcare in a school, went over the space use analysis that Ms. Olin provided to us, and thank you so much for that, Ms. Olin, very helpful. And then we talked about this committee's goals, and we'll pick back up on this committee's goals, I think, as the next agenda item. So thanks, Madam Mayor.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hale. So we will go to our packet page 2 and our 2023 goals and committee work. And Ms. Kester, am I going to you for that one?
Thank you, Mayor Wilden. I'd be happy to tee this off. The committee saw this document at the last meeting, as Assemblymember Hale mentioned, and there was some conversation about the goals for 2023 for the committee. So just wanted to put this in front of the body again. We've, I think, done the work of reviewing the charter and coming to a consensus on committee's charges. The next bullet point on there is forwarding a strategy for addressing declining enrollment to the Assembly and the school board. That includes determining the potential of repurposing space and addressing childcare needs in the community. As the sub bullet of that is providing the Assembly and the school board a matrix to aid in understanding the capital improvement needs of the facilities and ramifications for school closures. So that is some of our committee work that we would do in 2023, and then providing a prioritized plan for facilities major maintenance. The community needs to invest a lot in schools, and so understanding the priority of that investment is another goal for this committee, and establishing a framework for future committees. So ambitious goals for 2023. I think this would be the time for the members to discuss those, amend those, and we will keep the goals present in future packets so that we can keep referring back to them.
All right, thank you, Ms. Kester. So we were going to think about these between our last meeting and see if we had any changes. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question. I like these, and thanks to everyone who worked on these when I wasn't present. I'm curious, probably a question for Ms. Kester. Time for the Assembly to put together potential ballot questions related to bonds is rapidly approaching. I imagine this committee would be the right committee to think about school needs, but my question is, do we have the time to do that before those deadlines?
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Kester.
Thank you for that question. You are correct that this committee historically has performed a key role in bond initiatives for school improvements. the deadline to put something on the ballot this year is rapidly approaching. Municipal clerk is in the, I want to say it's like July something. So maybe it's July 10th or that meeting. So it certainly would be, if the committee wants to drive towards this election as a goal, that would be a pivot that we would probably need to understand and focus our committee action on, because that's probably not the timeline that Chair Hale and I had developed when developing the 2023 goals.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for that question, Ms. Wall, and Ms. Kester is 100% right. I actually had not been thinking that we would be recommending a bond package for this year. I feel like the work that we're doing is going to help us recommend future bond packages. And I know that we've all, as probably all of Alaska communities, have been waiting for the legislature to actually provide funding so that our bond package is a match. Obviously, we can't wait forever for that, but perhaps what can come out of this committee is a framework for making those recommendations next year or in the future.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Muldoon, you're not raising your hand, but you're nodding. Do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just briefly, I would like to say that I'm in alignment with Ms. Hale's comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Ms. Sorensen?
Yeah, one of the pieces here where it's the first bullet here under forward to strategy. It says repurposing space to address childcare needs in the community. I think it's kind of short-sighted to think that that's the only purpose that things could be repurposed for. Just because they happen to have children in them now, maybe that's not their, what it's going to be for forever and ever. I mean, depending on the building.
Thank you, Ms. Sorensen. That was something that I underlined too. So I don't know if we want to word that to say determine the potential of repurposing spaces. And we could say which could include addressing child care, but it could also include other purposes. So Ms. Kester, can you wordsmith that real quickly? And any other questions on any of our goals here? Or any other changes?
Mr. Holtz just raises.
Mr. Holtz, I hear you raised your hand, but I don't see a hand raised.
I'm searching for my hand raise button. Thank you for whoever saw that. I would have got there eventually. Thanks for the opportunity to make a comment on these goals. I brought this up at the end of the last meeting, and Mayor, you disagreed, and maybe I didn't state correctly or well what I was hoping. There's some misunderstanding in the community about how school funding works, and I think that leads to some, potentially this confusion. It seems like numbers are going down, therefore it should be immediately obvious that we should close a building, and that would immediately cause some savings. And I think we all know, this group all is well aware that that isn't how the funding formula works. And so I had suggested that an important work of this group would be that we could come up with some joint communications between the assembly and the school board, the city and the school district, about to educate the public on how school funding works. I know we can't give them a full course, but to anticipate that it's really easy to get confused about this. And it seems like, I often get in the community comments that, we're not being, somehow the school district isn't sort of paying attention, or somehow we have some ulterior interest or motive, when the funding formula makes a lot of sense for the current configuration of our schools. So, with your, I know that you specifically had some concerns about whose role that was. I'd like us to see if we could revisit that and narrow the scope, because I think it also creates some tension, I think, between the assembly and the school district, when we don't have, when it appears that, I think in our case, being maybe defensive on the school board side, that we are perceived as somehow being insensitive to the larger community in wanting to have buildings that could be perceived by some as not being necessary or somehow being wasteful. And that's as damaging to us and to you. And so is there a way to put in one of our goals in the committee to address that issue of better communication about how schools are funded, and primarily the fact that smaller schools generate more money than larger schools, right? And that's the piece that people really have a hard time with. 2 high schools provide more resources to the Juneau School District than 1 large Juneau Douglas High School ever did. And that's counterintuitive, but it's critically important as we move forward, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Holz. Is Sorensen? Okay, never mind. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I almost feel that the second bullet, forward a strategy for addressing declining enrollment to the assembly and the school board. And then the second sub bullet under that, providing a matrix to aid in understanding. That's what we're doing actually, is we're trying to look at the formula that Mr. Holz speaks of and other factors that we'll get to later in the agenda. We're trying to look at those in this committee, and that work, in my mind, should speak to the community via, for example, our reporting out to the assembly and the school board, the work of the committee. So I don't know that we need to add any wording there, but basically that's what I see the work of the committee doing, is answering that question that Mr. Holst raised.
Thank you, Ms. Hale, and I don't see anything further. And did we lose Mr. Muldoon?
I am here, Madam Mayor.
Okay.
But my internet is competing with.
Okay, sorry, I just couldn't see you on our big screen, but I was assured you're still with us. Seeing no hands, I appreciate the conversation, Mr. Holst. And I appreciate you trying to word it a little bit differently, but I would agree with Ms. Hale that I think we're kind of there with the strategy. And as far as educating the public, I still don't believe that's the role of this committee. This committee is looking and trying to come up with ways to improve our facilities, for lack of better terms, and ways to move limited dollars around our facilities, whether or not that includes closing a school or not, or consolidation, if you want to put it that way. I mean, initially this was just designed not necessarily look at least for me under my tenure as mayor, was not to look at closing a school necessarily. It was trying to figure out how to do school facilities maintenance, because they just kept popping up. So my thing would be, we keep that in mind of what you're saying, and when we come up with strategy, we can certainly, I think, address some of those. But again, I don't think this committee goal is to educate the public. We will have to educate each body where we're going as as the findings of a committee. You know, you guys will have to take yours back to the school district. We'll have to take our recommendations back to the assembly, but I just don't see educating the public as a role of this. So, and I'm looking around to see if anybody else has anything to say on that. And still don't see anything. So with that, we would like to get our goals approved. Does anybody want to make a motion? As amended by what Ms. Sorensen asked to change.
Madam Mayor, I move that the joint school district, Juneau School District and Assembly Facilities Committee approve of these goals as amended by Ms. Kester, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? And I'm apologizing, Mr. Muldoon, I have to call you out because I can't see you in any way, shape or form. So I'm, any
No
objection?
objection for me.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about to do that, but you're lost in my world here. So with that, we will move on to some information items. And we'll start state funding lost due to school consolidation. And I don't see anybody from the finance department. So Ms. Kester, are you taking that? Or will we just go to Ms. Owen?
I'll go ahead and introduce this and then pass it off to the school district. This, Mr. Holst really did a great job teeing up this topic because it is complicated, the funding formula and how potential consolidation affects the funding formula. You see that Finance Director Rogers went through a few scenarios, and if people are looking for the backup documentation on that, that is in the March Joint Facilities Committee packet. And he ran some numbers based on a couple of scenarios. But I think really what's key is that this committee understands the impact on funding of any decision, and to really understand that some scenarios need to be presented. And that's where the matrix comes into play. So under the matrix, when we can start developing some if-then scenarios, we'll really be able to put some numbers and contextualize that impact. So I wasn't prepared to give you a big math lesson because that is certainly not my strong suit, but wanted to just make sure that we kept this topic and the need for this body to really understand it front and center. And then I do know that Ms. Olin has a memo in here with some other things that we need to keep in mind. So I will pass it off to the resident experts in the room.
Okay, before we get to Ms. Olin's memo, though, maybe she could answer this question because it's a little confusing. And I apologize. I meant to call Mr. Rogers this morning and my morning just got away from me. We'll just pick elementary school consolidation. We would lose $519 approximately $1,000. But then on the third to the last paragraph, it says, could you walk me through the percentages things? I don't think I totally understand that.
Are you talking about the step down approach for the
Yeah.
consolidation? Okay.
I didn't totally understand that and how that fit in.
So it's approximately probably about 5 to 7 years ago, the state legislature put this in, and what it means is that we would continue to receive the funding for the school that got consolidated for the first 2 years at 100%. Then they step us down to 66 and then to 33. The other part of this is it's the consolidation affects every school that is consolidated or touched during the consolidation. So it could be if we take 2 of them or 3 of them, it affects all of them to consolidate. And so there's different areas. There's actually another spreadsheet that goes along with this to figure that consolidation out. And so it varies based upon that. And then it also varies with the new school coming in. Either if it's going to be larger because it's going to maintain more, there's a percentage offset with that also. So there's kind of a dual as it's coming in. We're losing revenue from that one, but we're increasing revenue on the other side.
Okay, I think I understood the very last sentence of what you said. So,
Yep.
but thank you for trying.
I know.
Any other questions on Mr. Rogers' memo? Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Ms. Olin, perhaps you can answer this question. I know that we have shifted, as the 4th paragraph from the bottom talks about the local contribution has shifted not from the foundation formula to the assessed values. Is that assessed value figure written in statute? And the reason I ask that is that assessed values have gone up everywhere or virtually everywhere. And so does this sort of, if assessed values go back down, maybe we'll fall out of that? And where is that figure? How do they decide to make that shift?
Well, the assessed values comes in from the certified property values. It's a 2-year lag on that. So we're always 2 years behind on what we do. In regards to the shift between mills and the and the actual state foundation formula. It has to actually deal with the number of students and enrollment and the base student allocation. And so because of the fact that we have lost a number of students due to the pandemic, in our first year of the loss was roughly about 600. And then we went and gained about another 200, and then we have kind of stayed stagnant in the last year or so. Because of that loss and the loss of our state foundation, it causes us to make that the assembly would be, or the city would be more on the edge because of the way the foundation, the formula equalizes it. So if the property values go up, obviously the city minimum contribution will go up. If it goes down, it will also go down. The assessed values are given to myself, actually, usually in about October or November, we received a certified letter from the state of Alaska in regards to it. And that's the number that we have to use for the assessed property value that we have to use within the formula.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And I think it also makes me realize that that is also quite a complex and moving target. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions on this one? Okay. Ms. Olin, we're going to yours now.
The basic information that I had in here, the only parts that I wanted to kind of identify or point out also is that what I was stating before was the consolidation affects every school that is consolidated in the formula of consolidation. So if you are consolidating an elementary into 3 other elementaries, all 4 of those go into effect into the formula. And so there's a variance of all 4 elementaries being affected by it. The other part, and one critical piece that I want to make sure everyone understands, is that there's a state statute that goes along with that consolidation piece. And the biggest part is we can't construct any new facilities to offset the decrease of that. We can't reopen a school being consolidated until 7 or more years, unless we provide evidence that the school is schools are at capacity and we need another school. And we can't reopen and then reconsolidate more than once every 7 years. So for instance, if you have 4 schools that are going through a consolidation into one, those 4 schools cannot be reconsolidated in another until 7 years has passed. So it's a very conscious decision that you have to make in order to get the actual funding correct and everything along the way. So our state statute allows us not to touch a consolidation until we have passed that 7-year mark, or unless we show evidence that we need to reopen a school. So it's not just the school that's being consolidated, it's any school affected with it is the important part of it.
Ms. Sorensen, you.
Yeah, I do. I just need some clarification there. So for these purposes, because we don't want to cause any domestic hysteria, we will call the schools A through F. So we close, in this scenario, we close school A and redistribute the children in B through D. 3 schools. Okay. So what happens then if we close school E and want to distribute children back into some of those schools that we've already distributed the first round of kids into?
We cannot do that. We could only distribute them to F for 7 years.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that question, because that makes it much more clear. Anything in the Zoom world? Any questions on that?
Madam Mayor.
Ms. Hale?
Thank you. I just have a comment, and as Ms. Kester and I were preparing for this meeting, it became really clear that this is good information here, but as we've as we've said earlier, it's not complete because there's so many factors to consider. So I really feel that the information that both Ms. Olin and Mr. Rogers have provided will help us in our matrix as we're looking at these numbers relative to other numbers like, operations and maintenance savings, capital costs, effects on the community. So I really see this as one piece of the whole.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. I was just basically going to say the same thing, or why some people probably get excited with numbers. We have to remember that the school district is much more complex than that. And so that kind of brings us to the matrix, unless anybody has questions on the school funding, but I'm not seeing any. The simplest thing might be just to kind of go through these little sections one by one. But looks like we're starting with you, Ms. Kester, because you wrote the memo.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. I wrote the memo with the collaboration and support of the school district, so I appreciate their contributions. I want to acknowledge that this memo is really drafted just to tee off the conversation about categories that should be included on this matrix. It should be considered a bit of a living document as we think through potential scenarios. We're going to want to add things and change things. So this is not an end all be all. But I agree with Mayor Weldon that probably deliberately going through the different categories and collecting comments from the body and recommendations on direction for staff will help us be able to come back to the next meeting with a more fleshed out document for you. So I'll go ahead and proceed with the first category.
That sounds great. And then let's pause after. Well, we can ask questions anytime, but let's just deal with the first one, the quantitative.
All right. So quantitative is probably the easiest to understand and maybe least insightful category, the percent of enrollment versus capacity as a percentage. And there's lots of unpacking of that number that other categories in the matrix will do, but this is really the data that was presented at the April 17th meeting that says what the uniform building code capacity is versus what the actual enrollment is. And I do have a recommendation in here that the committee possibly directs staff to review uniform building code with I-code, just because I-code is the more recent building code. So if that's something that the committee would like us to work on, we can do that.
Thank you, Ms. Kester. I certainly would like to see a review of that because coming from that world, we should certainly be going with the most updated building code.
The next category here is capital cost of renovations. And you actually will, the next agenda item really talks in detail about this. So not sure how to exactly tackle that, but understanding the work that each facility needs is going to be an important variable in your decision-making matrix. And originally I thought 30 years because that's a metric that I know other school districts use for major renovations, that a major renovation needs to last 30 years. But there are also, of course, important things that need to be done within the next 10 years. So I have that 10, 20, and 30 year metric under capital cost of renovations. And we can dig into this a little bit deeper. I have the 6-year CIP as the next agenda item. So however, Mayor Weldon, you'd like to approach that one.
It's kind of up to the committee, how they want to approach it. Any thoughts from the committee? We have a quiet group today.
I have a question that
Ms. Sorensen.
I have a question that goes back to the enrollment versus capacity.
Go ahead.
Because I know that, I believe it's like the fire code that drives a lot of this, isn't it? So, I mean, when I think about capacity, I think about, okay, like in our elementary schools right now, we have all the kids are in session. Plus we have 5th grade graduation, which fills up the gym to capacity with, you know, all these other people. So we have the capacity of the gym, the capacity of the school, you know, and all that has to work to be square with, you know, what's safe. So one of the things that I worry about, because we look at these numbers where they seem quite inflated relative to, you know, the carrying capacity for classrooms. And so I hope as we do this that we kind of don't get caught in that. Well, if we have all the families come and have all the kids here, you know, we can still do it safely.
Oh, thank you for that comment. Mr. Muldoon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also wanted to flag that I was having a bit of trouble with the words enrollment and capacity. In my mind, I like the word usage. I think that also helps explain where we are as a district. And the other thing I wanted to flag was they've had a very tumultuous spring, but the House Education Committee did flag the school size part of the foundation formula funding as needing some work to be completed this summer. And we've seen no motion towards that end, but it's just something to be mindful of currently. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Muldoon, would you repeat the very first part of yours you had a suggestion for language change?
Yeah, sorry, my internet's breaking up here. I just prefer the word usage versus enrollment or capacity to be more encapsulating of where we are as a district.
Okay, does anybody object to changing enrollment versus capacity to usage?
Madam Mayor.
Go ahead, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's just important, and if we can do as Ms. Kester requested and request an updated building code evaluation by the fire marshal and CDD. I think that's important, but I also think that whatever terminology that we use needs to match that and match what Department of Education uses. So if usage, I just don't want to obscure what we're trying to figure out, which is we're trying to figure out what the capacity is, and Ms. Sorens's comments were very important, and then where we're at relative to that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hale. And because Deed, correct me if I'm wrong, also has kind of capacity usage enrollment. And Dr. Weiss, you're nodding your head at me, so give us the right term you think that we should have.
Well, in terms of the term, I think there are some choices. I do appreciate Ms. Hale's comment of consistent language, and what we could do is maybe look and see how that starts looking once we do the I-code update and all of that. The one comment, if it's okay, that I was also going to make that might be something, it might be in that prelude paragraph. If not, we could maybe add something, but it's important to understand that these quantitative and qualitative factors that we're looking at, none of them stand in isolation. So they're all important considerations, but really they are all integrated together to make these kinds of really complicated decisions because of the type of program that we facilitate in our K-12 schools. So none of them at the end of the day is going to stand on their own merit in isolation.
Thank you, Dr. Weiss. And I think we all realize that, but maybe this will go back to Mr. Holz helping us educate the public. So maybe we need to start that, put that in bold somewhere to start our matrix. I have Mr. Holz and then Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Mayor. This, for all the concerns that have been already raised about this, including Ms. Kester's, opening comments about how this one is particularly challenging because it creates when there's a number there, it creates a lot of confusion. We know that. I almost wonder if we get rid of it or we attempt to add another number here that we really need, which is what is the actual use of the buildings at the current time. Ms. Olin and Superintendent Weiss put together a pretty comprehensive, very exactly comprehensive layout of all of the rooms that are available, because we don't actually, as we've learned, really pay attention to that percentage of capacity because it is so distant from how we actually use the buildings. So maybe so I would suggest that we attempt to identify as something that I think would be very useful going forward is something as simple as how many rooms in the building for classrooms are available, empty or available to be used as a classroom. And that would give a truer sense. So we have our pre-K programs that are in there. We just have to define that. Does that count as being used or does that not count as being used? But that would give this group and the community an understanding that what is actually available. Whereas this number, yeah, I just fear is only leads to further conversations and we end up having to backtrack and say this number is not very useful for us. So I think it's worth us considering a more precise number that really tells the story about what's empty and what's not.
Thank you, Mr. Hulse. I'll go to a couple other hands before I comment. Ms. Wall and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm thinking, and maybe I'm not thinking exactly about this matrix in the same way. You know, I imagine as we go through options or as a future assembly and school board go through options, that, you know, there'll be a tension between kind of this enrollment versus capacity or whatever we're calling it, and which people want to, there may seem room to fill a larger capacity if there is capacity, you know, compared with the desire to keep pupil teacher ratios lower. And so I'm wondering why we wouldn't just would we be able to look at pupil teacher ratios as part of this matrix, because those are different numbers in my understanding. Those are two different things.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's a great number to add, I think. And I understand from the school district that varies, but I think that's a great number to include. I understand where Mr. Holst is coming from, and I think understanding the use of the buildings is important. And if we flip to the next page, we have a opportunity section, and perhaps that can go there so that we can see how the buildings are being used for different uses like pre-K. I think that the number that I think what this matrix has to end up being is a mix of qualitative and quantitative. And I think that the actual capacity number is important so that we can actually have that as part of our information. And I mentioned at the last meeting, the April 17th meeting, that I think it's also important for us on this committee and the school board and assembly to make sure that we're cognizant of both the other uses, but also the true purpose of the schools, which is to educate our children. And if we're starting to talk about a lot of money needed for doing some work on facilities, and we're using those facilities for many other things than as schools, we really need to be thinking about the use as schools and make sure we have a way of looking at that.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. I think we need both. Going back to what Mr. Holst said, it's nice to see what are classrooms and what aren't. And as far as the pupil teacher ratio, that's part of the qualitative. I don't know if you saw that. But unfortunately, it's going to come down to numbers. The public is going to ask how many kids are in the school and how many kids could be there. So you can't run away from that question. So I think you're going to have the numbers. And it's our job to make sure that as Mr. Holst said, it's our job to make sure, again, that we're looking at in this matrix everything and not just the numbers. But it seems to me That's what the public's gonna ask. I can guarantee you that's what the assembly is gonna ask, or what are the numbers? And so I don't see how we could get away from the numbers, but I don't see why we can't have the usage, like both Mr. Muldoon and Mr. Hole said, and then the pupil to teacher ratio. Let's look at that a little bit, the next section, and see exactly what the idea is behind that, because this is the first time I'm seeing this too, so trying to go through this, so. So it sounds like in the quantitative section, we're gonna look at some other way to define enrollment versus capacity, to make it either what deed says or the building code says. And Mr. Holst, I don't know if you want to see the classroom section in this quantitative part, or what, how many rooms are used as classrooms, or the opportunity. What's your choice there?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm not opposed to, if we want to leave this enrollment capacity with the caveats and changes that we might make and get it updated. I understand that it is a reference point, but yes, what I think would be valuable is to some calculation that shows of the actual classrooms, how many classrooms are being used, if it's a K-5 building for K-5 education, and how many are not. Something, and then we could add a layer of PTR, which of course, everybody wants a lower PTR versus higher PTR. I think that those would be useful. I can hear Dr. Weiss telling me, well, Brian, some classrooms are used for other special education and other needs. So I think there's take a little bit of work with the administration to get us a clean number that says, yes, for this school to operate, these are the classrooms that are being used. And then we also know, because we've identified them, that there are other classrooms that we choose to set up as a meeting place for teachers. We know that push comes to shove, we could probably find another place for them to meet. But there, I think, there are classrooms. That's what my concern is, that we identify clearly what are the classrooms that need to be occupied in order for the school to operate as the school, and identify what's open. That's what I think the public really needs to understand. I think that's the consideration any of us would make if we said, well, let's actually consider consolidating a school, because that's where the kids would have to go, into those non-full space.
Okay,
So if
I'm
we could get
looking
something
at,
like that, that's what I would like.
I'm looking at Ms. Kester to see if she understands what you're saying. Are you clear on what Mr. Holst is desiring there?
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. I think that he is talking about the assessment of each school that the school district presented at the last meeting that has a lot of very important information. I think it might be valuable to move to the qualitative section, because we have spent a lot of thought with the school district on operational use. And I think the operational use category really covers a lot of those items. And in hindsight, I probably should have led the conversation with that, just because it is such an important variable.
Okay, so it sounds like Mr. Holst, we're gonna put that in the qualitative, but from my understanding, you want what sections of the school are for educational purposes, and then what's for gatherings or something like that, you said. Is that not, okay, he's nodding his head, so, okay, with that, it looks like we're dipping into the qualitative, whether we wanted to or not. Ms. Sorensen.
Well, I agree with what Mr. Holst is getting at. And I think one of the pieces is there's a quantitative part of it. It's like, what's the, what's the amount of the school that's purpose is education, providing education. And I think that, that's kind of the part that we want to get at, because if a school, only 60% of the school's usage is providing education, then clearly there's a remainder there that's, either potentially repurposed or whatever. But, because it's like when we think, well, we could repurpose it as childcare, we're already doing that in a lot of our buildings where we've moved those kinder ready and pre-kinders in and Head Start in. And so, but that's still education, educating the children of our community. So it winds up being quantitative, but I do like that it's in qualitative because everything we do, I hope, is qualitative in our schools. So that's what education is qualitative.
Okay, I don't have a necessary dog in this fight. I agree. So do you want it into quantitative or qualitatives? Okay, so qualitative it is. With that, Ms. Kester, anything further before we move on to, okay, Ms. Kester,
Thank you, Mayor Weldon.
qualitative.
On qualitative, I think I'm going to let Dr. Weiss talk about operational use because she really is the expert. She helped draft this definition and it is very important to the committee. So I think that would be the best use of our time.
Thank you, Ms.
Dr.
Kester.
Weiss.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So a lot of the conversation has really already been had around this particular use, this particular paragraph and consideration. And you can see that even pupil teacher ratio is in this paragraph. Our operational use is very complex and it changes from year to year. So as an example with PTR, to Ms. Wool's point, each year, the board determines based on resources that they have available, what the pupil teacher ratio is going to be, what that by grade level. So we do it in bands. K3 has a PTR, 4-5 has a PTR, middle school, and then high school. Generally, that means class size. Most lay people would think of it as class size. So if we have more resources, we know that our classrooms, our students benefit from a lower class size. So PTR comes down. That's more expensive because you have more teachers, which of course means that you then use more classrooms. So any decision that's ultimately made will have to, as an example, take that into consideration because there is flex from year to year, not only based on enrollment changes, but also decisions that are made fiscally to support the learning in our classrooms. And so you would have to consider that as you look at capacity, that you couldn't have it so tight that there would never be the opportunity to increase a classroom from year to year. Other uses, Mr. Holst mentioned special education, that's listed here. Not only special programs for students, but also for some of our special staff like related service providers. So we have occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech language pathologists, school psychologists that all exist inside of our buildings. And so they need office space, they need workspaces to work with students. So there's just a myriad of uses beyond simply that quantitative piece of number of students and square footage. We just aren't an office building where we have certain, capacities and stagnant office needs. So this paragraph is an attempt to just recognize that the complexity of just operations is very unique when it comes to educational buildings. And there could be certainly other things that aren't listed here, but we did touch on special education, PTR. The other piece for us is our administrative offices. So like you, we have challenges around how do we house our student services department, our teaching and learning department, our finance department. And so we're spread out already, where we use Thunder Mountain for student services. We use some of Marie Drake for teaching and learning. We have no space left in the district office. We have one person actually working in the we have one little conference room in the district office, and we have a person that works in that conference room that we have to boot out when we need that space. And so that's just another factor because we're limited in our central office space that we use our existing school buildings for some of that. So that was an attempt there. Again, the magic really is thinking about the qualitative and quantitative simultaneously and how those intersect.
That was well done.
Not bad for the second to last day of school. Is that what you're saying?
No, that was great, actually. I'm just questioning how you measure it.
It's really tricky, and that's why,
And that's
yeah,
what I don't.
Mayor, I totally agree, and I think that's what we've talked about in some of our planning meetings is you, at the end of the day, when you all end up in a place where you are potentially making some decisions, it won't be a number decision. It'll be a decision informed by the quantitative and the qualitative. Most of our decisions are that we do as a school district and as a school board are such. We're always balancing the quantitative and the qualitative. And so as much as we would like to be able to answer to our community in nice, neat numbers, I'm a numbers gal, right? I spent my career doing that. Love that. It just isn't the nature of our work in most any situation. This isn't going to be much different. You're going to really end up having to integrate the quantitative information you have and the qualitative and make the best decision for the community.
Okay, thank you. I have Ms. Wall and then Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm, understand this paragraph and what you said and kind of what types of things would go in this analysis. Do we have what we need to provide the different types of services that we want to provide? Where I think my earlier comment came from in my kind of what I feel like is missing from this matrix is there's no place that I'm grasping where we're contemplating the impact of our decisions on the quality of education. And so I think that's why maybe pupil teacher ratio isn't the right thing to be measuring to look at that, but there should be some sort of analysis that says, hey, this is going to increase class size or decrease class size or some other way that we can talk about how that impacts the quality of education. Does that make sense? And that feels different than operational use to me.
Dr. Rice?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I think that's a super, super important point. And we have tried to capture some of that in a couple of the other qualitative categories, but I also think maybe there's room then for another qualitative that somehow expresses that. Again, our overall mission is to deliver the highest quality education to our students. That's what's good for the school district. It's good for the assembly. It's good for our community. So there might be another, we could maybe work on that between now and the next meeting as another qualitative category that speaks just very directly to the mission of the school district and the mission of the assembly and supporting the school district to carry that out. We can play with that if everybody's agreeable.
Ms. Wall, follow up?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I just think that without it, all of a sudden you start maximizing other things if you don't explicitly kind of speak to the mission. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and Ms. Wall, thank you for that suggestion, and I think that's really important. And I also just wanted to kind of echo or just agree with Dr. Weiss. I think that the matrix is it's going to be a hard matrix to make. When I've envisioned it, I've actually envisioned like skyscrapers sticking up and like 3-dimensional matrix, but I know we can't do that. But anyway, I think that as I am imagining this, there are going to be numbers and we can go down a column of numbers, but there's also going to be text, and sometimes that's not going to be the easiest to you can't just go like that and understand something. You really going to have to think about it. But I do see and it's the suggestion by Ms. Wall is absolutely important, and it's just not going to be it's not a simple numbers game. It is complex, and we get at that more on the second page here. Thank you.
Thank you. And any hand raising for Mr. Muldoon? Sorry.
Not at all, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I like everything that's said. I don't like the paragraph. And I know we can't get to simple things, but if we could at least separate the paragraph a little bit, because I think any future people looking at trying to do a matrix will hit a paragraph and stop. And I would be afraid that they wouldn't incorporate some of the things that we're talking about that impact the quality of education. So because sometimes the thing is just to skip something that's confusing and we don't want to skip it. So and impact to neighborhood. Any comments on the next one, impact to the neighborhood or cultural impact? Although in this particular case, I think the culture is the culture of the school and rather than what we usually consider the culture, the native culture. So people happy with these two? I'm getting nods from folks. So, okay, with that, we'll go to opportunities. Ms. Kester?
This category is, I think as we move through this memo, we're getting into things that may be even more and more difficult to quantify or even articulate. But obviously, if there is an alternative facility need that's very strong in the community, that will impact the decision-making matrix. And childcare is certainly the example that we've talked through, but there are other examples. So that feeds into the next variable, which is, can the building be repurposed and what cost? Because we understand that, an aging facility that needs a lot of investment to provide education will still need investment for an alternative use. So really just trying to be able to capture what opportunities there might be, because it's a different conversation to say we're going to mothball this facility that has a liability to the assembly and to the city and borough of Juneau, then, hey, there are other needs for our community. So trying to capture that point.
Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I don't know, I kind of hate to say this, but I think it's important. I think in addition to can the building be repurposed, sometimes like Mount Jumbo, that building would probably not even still be here if the cost of demoing it wasn't so high. So, it's, can the building be repurposed? And if not, you don't want to just let a building sit vacant. So does the building need to be demoed and demolished and what would the cost of that be? And I'm not saying we can definitely put this in right now, but I think we need to be thinking about that as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. I guess I should probably ask this sooner, and I apologize. And I don't want anybody to get excited about my question. I don't mean it to be, it just shows my lack of education. Okay, so not blaming the Juneau School District, by the way, for that either. Okay, so the charter school used to be in a separate facility. Now it's in JDHS. How is it part of the school district exactly? And do we have to house the charter school and the Montessori?
So
Or can we find alternate facilities for those? That's my question. Sorry, I should have asked that sooner.
sure. One of the goals that the district had a number of years ago, because we were renting space, like similar to what you all have to do, and made an attempt to not be in the business of renting space to do our business. And so a couple of strides to do that were made. Charter school was in a building downtown that was really not functionable. And so we provided an opportunity to maximize the use of our existing space to allow them to lease one of the downstairs wings of JDHS, and that has worked out well. That the charter school and the Montessori program are two different types of programs, not just programmatically, but logistically. So the school board approves each year a charter school contract, and that is one of our optional programs with a different governance model and different state statutes that allow that to happen. The Montessori is more of an alternative program within our school district, again, the space we use is Marie Drake alongside Yokosuka Dakahiti. Currently, we don't have enough space in any one building to take one of those programs somewhere else in volume. We just wouldn't have it in a particular building right now.
So if I could summarize that to make sure, contract with charter, but we're saving rent. Montessori is basically part of the school district. That simple explanation, sort of the answer? Okay. Mr. Holst, you had your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. Maybe there's the last question and comment, and appreciate it, the explanation, Dr. Weiss suggests to me that maybe we should add an element to this matrix. Because I was on the board when we were looking very carefully at how do we consolidate onto our space and not pay rent. And that was actually part of why I'm excited for the charter school to be able to find a location that was actually purpose-built for education for their school, and also addressed some of our needs. You also know that the current space that the school district administration is in, used to be rented space, within the last about a decade ago. So maybe there's a piece, because the number is very small, and it could just be one extra matrix is how much is the school district renting or utilizing space outside the footprint of the district. And it's a super small number, but I think that helps us to remember that we've made an effort to reduce that, and could also be a positive check on, before we go out and rent other spaces, that we really double down and make sure that we don't have a way to meet those needs on campus. I mean, superintendent can correct me here, Ms. Olin, but I think we have a warehouse space. I think we share we have our own facilities, maintenance space, and then we have a warehouse space that we rent, I think, from CBJ for some materials. And then I think in some years we rent from the University of Alaska Southeast for some access to some CTE. I think that's about it. But anyway, I don't want to be. I think it's a thoughtful element to have on there, which is how much space we rent outside.
Okay, Ms. Kester scribbled a whole bunch of notes, so hopefully she'll come up with something worthy of what you asked for next time. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And one thing that Ms. Kester and I had talked about as we were preparing for today's meeting was just a little discussion. Perhaps the school district could prepare like a 1-page on the nuances of the charter school and Montessori Borealis and Yakutsk, because those are all different and kind of unusual, and they each have their own complications. And so one of the things I wonder, and we don't have to answer this now, but it would be nice to get more information on with the charter school. If it's, I just don't understand the finances of it. I've gone to the deed website to try to understand charter schools better. So it would be nice if we could talk about that at the next meeting, more detail. Thank you.
Now Dr. Weiss is scribbling notes. Okay, anything else?
Madam Mayor.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you. I don't know, and maybe Ms. Kester feels that we did, but I don't know that we actually covered everything in the quantitative section, and it's related to the next agenda item. So I just want to see if we need to circle back to that.
I'm looking at the next agenda items. Okay, I guess you're being too kind. Just say what you wanted to say, and what do you think we missed?
Quantitative section also has capital cost of renovations, which is directly related to the next item, maintenance and operations, and then school size. And so we talked about the school size and impact on funding formula, but I just want to make sure that everybody agrees that we want to know what M&O would be if we savings would be if we consolidated, and that also capital costs is part of that figure as well.
Okay, and that brings us directly into our next, unless we want to add to the matrix right now before we get to the CIP. I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand at the moment, but maybe after we discuss this, we might circle back and add something to the matrix. There's no reason we can't do that. So with that, Item number 4, review the 6-year CIP. Do we need a high-level condition assessment of facilities? Ms. Kester, I'm going to you again.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. If you look at the 6-year CIP, it's at the last page of your packet. It enumerates the facility needs across the school district, but you know, the level of detail is certainly less and less the further we get out into fiscal year future. You know, I think that my staff and Dr. Weiss's staff has a pretty good understanding of some of our immediate needs, but the further out we get, the more difficult it is to really be able to say how much investment facility needs to be brought up to modern standards. And that is certainly exacerbated by the fact that our, you know, cost estimating world that we live in is so volatile. It's expensive to do a facilities condition assessment, which is what we would really need to get a good handle on that. So one of my recommendations in the memo, if the committee believes that having, you know, more solid numbers than the 6-year CIP, if the committee believes that that would be valuable, is to direct the facilities committee to do some work on what schools would be good candidates for a condition assessment and the kind of level of detail that that we would like to see. Of course, level of detail will determine budget. There are schools that like probably are obviously not going to need the same level of effort and may not be worth putting, you know, on that list. That, or maybe you could approach it from the perspective of like, well, there's these 3 schools that just really rise to the top, and so let's, you know, start this process by looking at these 3 schools. So the kind of question before the body today is, would it be premature to get the ball rolling on directing some of that effort? We could, you know, there's it would come back to this body, but there is a cost associated with that effort. Or do you want to spend more time, you know, talking through the matrix before coming up with some of that direction on a better condition assessment?
What is the will of the committee? I see nothing. So let's talk to the matrix. Oh, Mr. Holz.
Yeah, just want to say, Ms. Kester, I'm sure you've done this, but this committee commissioned a study of facilities very extensively at considerable cost, as I understood it, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. There's a very thick book that was created. So, I mean, I think we're all open, of course, to best and current information. But I just want to mention that because I think there's a lot of work has been done. I think we have a pretty good understanding of what our facility needs are. But if we are going to do something, just let's make sure that we build off of that sizable investment that was made in the recent past.
They're scribbling frantically. I would, I don't know that we need it because you guys are the experts on the schools. So I don't know if we need updated assessments or not. So, and I don't know, Ms. Kester, because you're holding your cards pretty close to your chest today, if you would suggest that we do that, or Dr. Weiss, if you suggest we do that, because we do know that it comes at a cost. And if we have a pretty good idea what they need, I don't know if we want to spend that money. Nobody's jumping to the mic.
Mayor Weldon, I'll take a stab at that. You know, I think it really depends on the level of detail that should be informing these decisions, because I mean, I think we know the need is great and we know it's greater at some facilities. And I do think that my department is sometimes hamstrung by talking in like big numbers. And so my staff certainly is like, we don't really even know. Whereas for the decision makers purpose, we probably have at least some level of information, as Mr. Holz said. So, you know, I think that this would be fine to punt to a future meeting. And when we kind of understand what the committee needs to make those decisions, direct staff and possibly a facilities committee to do that work, understanding that work will take time.
Thank you, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. You know, and I just wonder if if the school board facilities committee or the engineering department can work with the information that Mr. Holst referred to at least, you know, when I look at the final page and I look at Marie Drake needing 42 million, Mendenhall River, 25 million. You know, those are really big numbers. And if there was some way of having, if that information has been put together in the last 5 or 6 years, or even 10 years, if there is some way of breaking that out from that information that was put together so that we actually have a better sense of what we're talking about. I mean, 42 million is a really huge number. So if we had some sense of, you know, this for 10 million and this for 5 million, that would help.
Ms. Sorensen.
Well, I got on the school board. I was elected in 19, and I have been to almost every facilities committee meeting since then. And there, in my mind, I mean, we talk about the 6-year CIP, we talk about, I mean, it's nothing except lists of expenses for things. So I think that there's numbers, and we, in our conversations from the school perspective, we've asked about, you know, how to break things apart and understand them better. From my personal perspective, it winds up being, you know, just here's the fire. This is the fire we need to put out. We need literally the fire curtain for the JD theater. We've lost the freezer for the food service at JD. We need to replace that. We've lost a boiler at Mendenhall River. Then that, you know, that rises to the top of the list. I would agree with Chair Hale that, you know, we need, some of these things need to be broken into smaller pieces. That, you know, that we can maybe address before it becomes a crisis, because it seems like all we do is jump from crisis to crisis, which then leaves us unable to actually do any kind of like staged maintenance beyond roofs. So, I mean, I don't have a solution, but I do, just because of all the meetings that I've attended, I do have some perspective on the issues.
Thank you, Ms. Sorensen. And that would kind of be my take too. I mean, I look at MRCS renovation at 25 million, and I know it needs some work, but 25 million is a big pill to swallow. So I guess Ms. Kester, whatever you need to do to break that number, and I'm purposely avoiding Marie Drake. I'm at 42 million. I'm just not interested. I'm sorry. And I may be the only one on the committee, but I'm just not interested. We could certainly make that as building as hospitable as we can, but I see that as pouring good money after bad, because I think that building is just served its time and we should be focusing more on the other schools myself. So that, so whatever you need to break those into bite-sized chunks, that
you.
would be great.
Thank you, Mayor Weldon. I will work with school district and engineering staff and bring more information to the next meeting that can help you understand if you have the numbers that you need for your decision-making process.
And just to make sure, because I think we're all at the spreadsheet on the back page now, just to make sure this is on our CIP plan already, right? These 6 years, so we're already taking care of that. Okay. Ms. Olin?
The other part of this is that the top 8 items on here, excluding the Murray Drake entry improvements and the MRCS restroom. The rest of these items are on the 6-year CIP list for deed, which go through the state legislature. So Murray Drake and Mendenhall renovations, those numbers are coming from there. So that is why they're on this list for a second time too.
Okay, but correct me if I'm wrong. Deed hasn't moved on that list, I think, since I've been in office. Okay. Okay, good to know. The bright spot of our day. So we kind of jumped into all things CIP. So any further questions, Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I didn't hear that last comment before you said the bright spot of our day. What was that?
Ms. Olin said that on the D list, our stuff has moved up a little bit. Nothing funded, I don't think, but has moved up.
The Gastineau roof did move up and it was funded this year. We actually received funding for that. So from last year's legislation, and the Coctaguheen and the Dezonte-Kahidi ones are very close to being, if the capital budget from the current could possibly be funded, 1 or 2 of those actually for the upcoming year. So our roofs are being funded at the moment.
Well, that's, Ms. Hale, did you hear that?
I did hear that, and that's really wonderful. And my comment relates to both Ms. Sorensen's and your comments about, that things haven't been funded since you've been in office and things haven't been funded. It's been putting out fires since Ms. Sorensen has been on the school board. That's not the way it used to be, and that's not actually the way it should be according to statute. And perhaps some progress was made in the legislature this year. I don't know if it's this committee, but maybe it is this committee, if not this year, then next year. But somehow we have got to get into a meaningful conversation about this path or that path. And one of the paths is if the state is going to start funding things again, and another path is if the state is not, what are we going to do as a community? And I'm not quite sure when that conversation happens, but I think it's an important one.
All right, thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Muldoon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for your comments earlier. It kind of started some thoughts of my own here, and I have a question for Ms. Olin, and specifically to Marie Drake, in the sense that it houses a lot of programs. So is there any unique factors we would need to consider? Like if we were potentially looking at that one for a closure, I'm not recommending that or leaning that way now, but the 7-year thing is the one that I get concerned about with that redisbursement of students. And I'm just wondering if there's any other curveballs we need to be considering if we were to go down that path. Thank you.
Ms. Olin.
I think the biggest factor of that is Murray Drake houses our entire information technology server structure, along with the pipe that comes in for our internet services for the whole entire district. And that was part of a construction project from probably about 10 years ago, I believe. And so that would be something we would have to take into consideration of the building, because it is in the basement of Murray Drake. It takes the whole entire basement. And there is a lot of equipment and a lot of networking down there that helps control all the internet and telecoms within the school district.
Anything further, Mr. Muldoon?
No, thank you. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, with that, any public participation on non-agenda items? Seeing only one member of the public and she's shaking her head. We'll move on to, I'll let you handle this, Ms. Hale, because you're Madam Chair. Future meeting topics or future meeting dates. Any topics we want to go other than we're going to definitely see our matrix come back. And it sounds like Ms. Kester is going to try and make some chunks of the facilities in just little smaller numbers. Anything else?
Definitely, I think the bulk of next meeting will be actually starting to work on the matrix and look at it and think about populating it and how to populate it. The other item, and I understand that Dr. Weiss was scribbling some notes, is just have this committee have a better understanding of those 3 school programs or schools within schools, the Montessori Borealis, the charter school, and Yakusk. So I think those are the two that Ms. Kester and I had talked about, and it seems like this committee is in agreement with that. Ms. Kester, do you want to take it from here and add anything that I've missed and also talk about dates?
I think we've got plenty of work cut out for us. We had talked about another meeting in a month to give staff time to do some of that follow-up work with looking at a draft matrix. And I have the 28th or the 29th noon to 1:30 as potential dates to chew on. So we can follow up with an email on that, but probably thinking either one of those days, as long as it immediately doesn't work for the body, we will start from there.
I see people looking at their calendars. Dr. Weiss.
Thank you. If I could just make one quick comment, I would, in support of a JSD parent who has 5th grade promotion in 7 minutes at Harborview, if we could do whatever planning quickly, and then so I can race her over there to enjoy being a parent for a minute.
All right. Mr. Muldoon, your hands raised. Keep it fast so these ladies can leave.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just thinking about with the dates here, we're bringing our new superintendent on. He's on with us right now. And also we have budget revisions due to D July 15th. And so I would just look to my staff to see if they're able to accommodate those late June dates, giving all those factors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Muldoon. We will, the 30th was a problem because it's the last day of the fiscal year. We could do the 27th or 28th, and I had planned on inviting Mr. Hauser to that meeting. Oops.
Thank
All right. Seeing nothing else, and feel free to get hold of Ms. Hale or actually Ms. Hale if you have other topics. We're adjourned. Everybody.